All right, everyone, good morning. Thanks so much for waking up and being with me today. My name is Jenny McGarra, and I'm really excited to be with you. I know some of you here. It's good to see some familiar faces. But for those of you who I haven't met, I'm from Chicago, where it was really funny. I got off the plane last night around 1 in the morning, and the DoubleTree shuttle guy was like, "Ooh, you wrapped up for the cold? Are you ready?" I think he might be used to people coming from warmer climates in New Hampshire, and I was like, "It's so warm here, it's great." Like, I was taking off my ear muffs. I was like, "It's downright tropical in New Hampshire." So it's nice to get out of the blizzard that we have going on over there. I worked in Chicago Public Schools for a little over a decade, was a district administrator for a few years, and I now work with an organization called EdTech Team. We try and help teachers and educators worldwide. But what I really want to talk to you today is about the experience in my classroom and as an administrator and thinking about how social media can have a positive impact on students teaching and learning. But before I do that, I kind of want to learn, especially because we're a nice small group here, who's in this room so I can differentiate my content for you and think about how I'm sharing the stories and exemplars that are going to best suit the questions that you might have come with. So let's start off with our classroom teachers. Where are the classroom teachers around the room? Hey, just you? Anyone else? Oh, a few more. Hi, yay. For those of you who are classroom teachers, is there anyone who teaches any students under the age of 13? Okay, good to know. How old are your kids?
I teach 6th grade, so and also teach 7th grade.
Okay, cool.
K through 8.
K-8. What do you teach?
I'm a technology integrator, but
All right,
in the classroom too.
Yes, but you do have to deal with the kiddos who are under that age of consent, right? The 13, yeah. And first through 5th grade. All right, so your students are also under that age. How many of you are other technology coaches, you support teachers, and then are administrators? Hi, yay. And for the administrators, how many of you are building administrators at district level? Okay, cool. So for those of you who raised your hand for administration, some of you probably have policy decision power. A few of you probably do. So hopefully this session will help you give some ideas of the policies that you set around social media and where you need to think to be more tight or to open up. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about that because my last district admin role, I was the assistant superintendent of technology, and I had to make those policies, and sometimes I was like the fascist hammer where they were like, "She's so mean," and other times I was like, "Let them free." So I'm happy to share some of my thinking around that, but I'm sure you've thought of it as well. So, when we think about social media, I taught grade 4, just to be completely transparent, and the reason...
I was just going to say library.
Oh, sorry. You know what? I never ask librarians because I always count librarians as classroom teachers. So I apologize. In my mind, whenever I say classroom teachers, I also mean librarians because you work with students every day. So apologies for not naming you outright. Math teachers. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. All right. So I taught grade 4, and all of my students were under the age of 13. Now, for those of you who don't spend time reading all that fine print when you sign up for Twitter, then you just click, "I agree, accept." And no one actually, I've read these terms and conditions, no one actually reads all the terms and conditions. Actually, my husband does, he's an attorney. But no one really reads them. One of the things in there says you have to be over the age of 13 to use that service. It's part of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act is to make sure our kiddos are safe and they're not sharing their personal information. However, those of you who have children or work with young children know that they all cheat, make up a fake birthday, and say that they're like 20 years old when they're in like grade 3 so that they can get on Twitter and do silly things. So a lot of the things that I was grappling with as a grade 4 teacher was wondering, what is going on with my students on social media? Can I leverage this power for good? How does this work? And when you think about social media, you usually think, social media, what is it good for? And at that point, my thought was that it was good for nothing, that the only exemplars I saw, so I wasn't on social media at that point. The only time I saw people using social media were celebrities, like Kim Kardashian tweeting about things like, can't sleep tonight, maybe it's because my baby Kanye West is in here with a couple BBM crying face, like, I don't even know what BBM is, I don't totally know, I think it's BlackBerry Messenger, which isn't a thing anymore. Or like tweeting pictures of what they ate that day, like, okay, do you really want to if you want to learn about 4th grade mathematics, which is what I wanted my students to care about during the day, then you don't need Twitter. So I spent all that time trying to take all the devices away from my students, power down from the internet so we can focus on what's important, like polygons and surface area, you know, really important hard-hitting stuff. But, you know, then I realized that it could be even worse than that. As I dug deeper into what my students were using Twitter for, I started to think, gosh, it would be so great if they were using Twitter to tweet out pictures of their lunches or follow Kim Kardashian, because a lot of times they were doing worse things, like cyberbullying. So we saw, and as you know, working with students, this is not a new thing, this has not gone away, that a lot of students are using social media to be brave behind the keyboard, to say things to each other that are really awfully cruel that they probably wouldn't say face to face. And we saw that happening as the rise of the internet and social media happened throughout our schools, as you saw as well. But the thing about all of this was that we realized over time that what if social media could be used for good instead of evil? How could we get our kids to take that courageous spirit that they had behind the keyboard to say, I would never say that to your face, and I'm going to be the cruelest of the cruel and say that to you, to funnel that courage into something a lot more positive? Many of you probably have students in your classroom who aren't brave enough to speak up. Many of you probably see kids walking in your hallway who haven't really felt comfortable in their identity, haven't felt comfortable raising their hands, who maybe do raise their hand, but they haven't really had a chance to hear others. One of the powerful things about social media is it can really create an equitable playing space for voices. And as we're raising our students, whether they're in pre-K or post-12, we really want them to be able to learn how to leverage their voices for positive and powerful reasons. And I say that as a math teacher, and a lot of people are like, you're a math teacher, why do you care about kids using their voices? Talking about math is important too, my friends. So today in this session, I want to think about how can we use that power of social media for good things, like amplifying our students. And these are two of my former students. This is Jaden and Jazzy. And Jaden and Jazzy were complete opposites, polar opposites. Jazzy, in this picture, is not acting. That's just how she was 24/7. Like, she would walk in every morning and be like, hey, Miss McGarrett, what's going on? I did this. And she would recap her life from 4 o'clock the previous day when I last saw her until the second that I walked up at about 1 million words per minute at decibel volume of billion, right in my face. And I'd be like, okay, Jazzy, that's great, come on in. Here's your granola bar, let's have a seat. Here's your oranges, okay. And if I walked away, she'd just follow me, just yelling. And it was like that throughout my entire class. And sometimes it was on-task talking, other times it wasn't, but she had a lot to say in a very clean package. Jaden, on the other hand, I looped with him. I had him for 2 years. I had him as a grade 4 and as a grade 5. I think in those 2 years, I had a mass collection of spoken out loud words of maybe 20 or 30 words. He was the shyest kid. To get him to pose for this picture was like pulling teeth. I think I had to like promise him, you know, a sultan's fortune to sit down and just be like, just hold your mouth and pretend you're talking. He's like, I don't want to. I'm like, yes, you can do it. Now, the reason I was able to get him to get to this point, though, is because he did have a lot to say. And after spending a year in grade 5 with me, after a year of silence in grade 4, even though he still didn't feel comfortable speaking out loud, I knew so much more about Jaden because we started to use social media to get to the bottom of his voice. Now, the thing that is really important to know here is that when I did this with these students, Jaden again was in grade 5, so he was only 10 years old, and Jazzy was in grade 4, so she was only 9 years old. So how did I use social media while following the terms of use? I did not break the law. I'm married to an attorney, and he scares me, so I do respect the law. So how did I do it? So, you know, we use some common platforms like Twitter and Facebook, but we also use some more school-friendly platforms as well that we'll talk about. One of them, sadly, the artist formerly known as Today's Meep is no longer there, but I do want to talk a little bit about how we used it, even though it's not around anymore. So the big thing about this, it was connecting our students to authentic audiences. Now, when we're thinking about authentic audiences, what I mean by that is someone beyond their teacher and their parents who would care to hear what they're saying. For a lot of our students, their parent and you are the only 2 people or 3 people who really want to hear what they have to say. Sometimes, sadly, in a lot of the communities I worked, the teacher was the only person who cared to hear what they had to say. And so after a while, our listening becomes a little tokenized. It's like when your mom says that you look good, you're like, you have to say that, you're my mom. Like, you have to listen to me, you're my teacher. So there's something powerful when these audiences, beyond the people who are paid or biologically told to love them, are hearing them and responding to them and validating their voices. And there's a lot of different levels of this authentic audience that we want to consider when we're thinking about how to connect them to the world around them. The first being the innermost circle, their classroom community, the other students who sit around them every day. The next concentric circle being their school community, the students who exist with them in the building, but they might not see on a daily basis, adults included. Then, of course, there's the networked community. The networked community, at least in the definition that I'm using for today's session, is the community of people with whom they have a connection through someone else. Think of it like the do you guys remember 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon? Okay, so like, I know somebody who knows Mike, who knows so-and-so, so like, I have a connection to you. But then, of course, there's the global community. People to whom I have zero connection and normally would have zero hope of ever reaching. You know, thinking, you know, high up politicians who affect policy in my community, celebrities, experts, people in space. So how can I get at those people as well? Now, throughout time, we've tried things. Teachers, before we had technology, we would do things. I'd have my kids write letters to our senators, like physical letters. I would have students, you know, create different posters and send them out and share them. But very rarely would we get a response. Through social media, we're starting to see that change and starting to see a two-way channel happen between the smallest of learners and the largest of voices in the world space. So let's start with the class community. Now, the thing about the class community is that it's a little bit like a dinner party. My former teaching partner, Autumn Laidler, used to talk all the time about how our daily routines in our classrooms, especially in the K-6, sometimes K-8 space, can be a little bit like a dinner party. Meaning, when you go, think about Thanksgiving. How many of you had a big meal at Thanksgiving? I hope everyone. It's amazing. And for some of you, you probably are like my family, where you just like eat wherever, on the couch, on the stairs, wherever like you can find a square inch of space to like scarf down your mashed potatoes and pumpkin pie. But some of you may have nice sit-down Thanksgiving dinners with beautiful tablescapes. Now, my in-laws' family is more like the latter. My family's like eat before someone takes the last bit of chicken, or sorry, turkey. I got in at 1 a.m. Poultry. My husband's family is like you have a table card and you sit down and like you sit where you sit, and every single year, I've been married to this man for 10 years, it's like walking into the door is like my sentence. Because wherever my table card is set, I look to the left, I look to the right, and I look across, and these are the 3 people I have to spend the next 3 hours talking to. And I'm like, please don't let it be Uncle Jim. Please don't let it be Uncle Jim. You know, then I sit down and I'm like, oh, it's my sister, she's cool, great. And our students are a little bit like this. When they walk into the classroom and they see who their assigned seat is next to, they're like, these are the kids that I'm going to be interacting with for the next X amount of time until the power on high, aka my teacher, decides to reassign my seat to another dinner party guest. Now, even the kids who have non-assigned seating in our upper grades, they do this to themselves, right? They sit down and they're like, here's my bestie, what up, Crystal? And then it's like, it's you and me, do or die, forever. And I'm never going to talk to that kid down across the room. Even when we have discussions, whole group Socratic seminar discussions in our classrooms, it's still kind of a one-at-a-time type piecemeal conversation. So a student could be in a class of 24 other students for an entire year and never have a two-way conversation with half of them. And they're missing out on the perspective, the ideas, the insight, the pushing that these other kids could be giving them. And I say this even again for our youngest learners. I spent so much time when I became an administrator in our early learning classes because I realized that we weren't giving them enough recognition about how autonomous and how much agency these young learners could have. And I saw the exact same patterns repeating in our kindergarten classes that I saw in our 12th grade AP history classes. Kids would talk to one at a time, just a small group, all day, every day. So how can we take the concept of social media and put it into our class culture and routine? Now, one of the things about social media that I think is really positively powerful is everyone has equal access at any time to the conversation. When you're on Twitter, you don't have to take turns who's saying what when. When you're on Twitter, one voice doesn't necessarily overshadow the others because they all have equal space on a feed depending on how much you tweet. What you can do in a classroom is think, how can we level the playing field where a student's volume of voice, an amount that they want to say, is it going to overpower others? And the first way to kind of build that up is silent discussions and back channeling. Now, the way that I'm going to lay out this discussion of social media is intentional, because this is how, when I became a technology and innovation coach, and then as an administrator, I supported my teachers in thinking about how to bring social media safely into their classrooms, and very importantly, with intention. Whenever we're using any piece of technology, intention is so key. We should never bring something into our classrooms just because it's a fad or it's the newest thing. We have to be thoughtful about why are we bringing this in and how is it intrinsically making this learning moment and experience better for the students, the teacher, and the community. So before we take out any devices, the first thing we do is silent discussions and back channeling, and we do this through analog means. We take out anchor chart paper and markers, and we break the students into small groups, usually of 4 to 5. Again, this isn't going to work with your youngest learners because they're pre-writing, so any students who are grade 1 and below, this is probably not going to be the best way to do it, but we can talk a little bit about how to support them. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to chat with you after. But for the kids who are able to write, we give them each a different color pen, marker, or crayon, and colors are important here, and you'll see in a moment. And on each anchor chart, we put a curiosity catalyst or a question. And the question is always going to be something very innocuous to start. I would never start something like this as like, what's the difference between surface area and volume? Because half the kids will be exiled from that conversation because they were like, well, I haven't really paid attention to you when you taught that lesson this year, so I don't know how to answer that. I want everyone to feel like they have equal buy-in and desire to answer the question. So I'll ask questions that are about perhaps a piece of media that we recently saw, a question about pop culture, a question that's going on in our community that I know every student is going to have a deep view about. The other thing is I try and ask questions that are somewhat polarizing because I want to have a discussion happen. One of the discussions that were happening in my classroom, and I was often fighting when I was trying to teach math to stop happening, was the discussion of where we were going to go for our end of the year field trip. And so at one point in the year, when I was starting to do this, all the kids were arguing if we were going to go to the zoo or to their show, or we should go to a movie. So I made that the question across all of the anchor charts, and the kids had a ton to say about it. The question goes in the middle, and then everyone draws a bubble out, like you do a thought bubble or a concept map, and you write your answer. But as you continue, you respond to other people's answers by drawing branching bubbles. So you're creating an open discussion thread visually on the paper. The students are not allowed to talk, and they have to keep writing, they have to keep participating until the buzzer goes off. I like to time things with music in my classroom, so I usually put on an instrumental song. Has anyone heard of the band Vitamin String Quartet? Yeah, do you want to tell them what it is?
They do all popular songs through the quartet, so Led Zeppelin or
Bruno Mars.
They'll do it, yeah. They do.
So it's completely instrumental. It's all through a string quartet. It sounds lovely, and the kids walk in thinking they're listening to classical music, and they're like, oh wait, this is Michael Jackson's Thriller. Rad. So I usually put out a song, time it through that. They have until the end of the song. They need to keep writing. Sometimes kids write, I don't know what I need to write anymore, but Ms. McGarris said I need to keep writing. But the thing is it keeps them engaged, and usually they think of something new. At the end, they go around and they look and evaluate their participation. And we evaluate their participation by having them take a checklist. Again, right now it's all analog, but feel free if your kids are super tech savvy to use a Google form or a doc. And they evaluate how many times they started a thread. So how many times was their color the first bubble out of the middle? How many times they replied? And then if your kids are a little bit older, you can have them analyze the type of replies they have. Were they questions? Were they statements? Were they supportive statements? Were they adding to the conversation? And the reason why we do this is because I want my students to think about when the playing field is leveled, what kind of a communicator are they? Do they always validate others? Like, yeah, I agree. Like, some of the students will go through and look at all of their comments and they're all validations. Yes, that's right, I agree, good idea, way to go. But they're never coming up with original content themselves. They're never sharing their own ideas. Other kids are question askers. Why do you think that? I don't understand, tell me more. Other students take a really long time and then drop a hot ball of knowledge every 5 minutes. So they'll sit there and they'll think, and they'll think, and they'll think, and their color will be on the paper one time, but that one thing they wrote was like Gandhi level epic, mind-blowing. And I want my students to think about that, but I also, as an educator, want to think about that so I can coach them on how to use their voices more intentionally moving forward. We begin this way so that they can learn to safely and intentionally use their voices in an asynchronous, all-at-once conversation. Asynchronous in that they can come to it any time, all at once, meaning it could also happen all at once. So at the end of the day, they take a look, and this is something that a bunch of administrators wrote, so it's, this is, I'm very good actually use this with students as well. But you can see how often the person with the red marker wrote, the black marker, and the green marker. And this is what the students would do to analyze their own thinking. Sometimes for some of my students, I had a few students that I worked with who were autistic and they really needed to see some more visual cues for that. And we created a coding system where they would put a star for every time they had a new idea, a question mark every time they had a question, a dot, dot, dot every time they added something. So you can come up with your own symbol guide and have them even draw on the paper and create little symbols next to the type of discussion they're having. From this point, we then introduced a closed technology discussion board. And by closed technology, I mean it's something that the public has zero access and potential to access. Examples of this might be Google Classroom chat-like discussion. How many of you use Google Classroom? Great. Google Classroom, Edmodo, Schoology, any LMS, Canvas, they all have discussion boards on them. This one is Edmodo. But you do a similar thing. You post an intriguing question and let the kids have at it. This was less of an intriguing question. This was a word problem, but I don't have video of the original. But this is the students talking about how to solve, I think, how many mugs of hot chocolate I drank that day or something like that. Some of the platforms have embedded discussion tools that a lot of educators don't notice at the first look. That's really important to take a peek at. For example, Schoology in their discussion board allows you not only to have the students have the discussion, but embed rich media into it, which I really like for our younger learners. So for my K-12 tech integrators and my librarian friends, when you're working with your youngest learners and you feel like, oh, I'm not sure I can have them do this because they're not able to type yet, a lot of the different discussion thread options have the little picture and video icon, and then they can just record themselves talking, create a little 10-second snippet, and create a video thread discussion. And it's really neat to see the kids listen to each other's threads and then record responses. The other thing I like about a lot of these threads, and to look for this feature as well, is a lot of them allow educators and discussion facilitators to not only see when the students responded, but to see exactly where in the discussion the students responded. So this is the platform's version of having you use a red marker and a blue marker and a green marker. So for example, Sincere responded in these two places. So when I highlight his name, which I forgot to highlight, you can see up here it says Sincere Clear Filter, and there's a little 4 next to it. If you can't see it, that's what it says right there. And so I can see he participated 4 times in this discussion, and then it highlights the places where he was discussing. So I can go ahead and look at that, or even take a screen grab and show it to Sincere as well. So I decided to try this out across a bunch of different classrooms and to help the students build that muscle of being intentional as they're participating in a discussion. And I needed that curiosity catalyst, that question or that idea that would be pervasively interesting across a wide array of age ranges. And I came across this on BuzzFeed. Yay, BuzzFeed! This is a photographer named Gabriele Galimberti, and he created this photo series called Toy Stories. Has anyone seen this before? It's really great. Essentially what he did was travel the world, meet lots of really great kids, and ask them, what are your favorite toys? And then he would have the students set up the toys in whatever living space they were in and take a picture with the children and their toys. Now, I would show this to our second graders all the way up to our 12th graders, and all of them were intrigued by this because at one point or another, they were interested in toys. And so as they saw the photos of the children from around the world, they were supposed to be responding silently without any oral discussion. Now, the big difference here was that I didn't ask a question. And that's important because in social media, very often there's no initial, like, here's the question, everyone responds to it. It's just like, you're just saying what you're thinking in real time. So this was getting into that concept of back channeling, exposing students to an onslaught of media or information and letting them respond in real time based on their initial reactions. And so I would show them pictures like this of this young man from Thailand and his motorbikes, this young girl from Sweden and her dollhouses and stove and baby carriage, this young boy from Kenya and his stuffed animal, this little girl from Algeria and her bike and toys, and this young man from Ukraine. Now, as they were responding, they had a lot of different reactions. A lot of my students reacted to this photo right away. I taught in a community my entire career that was 99% African American, and so when they saw this young man, who for the very first time in this photo series, the way it was presented to them looked like them, and saw where he was living and saw the number of toys that he had as compared to the other students, they had a very visceral and emotional reaction. Interestingly, my students did not react to this picture. How many of you saw this picture and had a reaction? My students did not react at all to it. I did. I was expecting them to say, why does that boy have something? And also the look on his face, right? Like the other kids are all smiling. This young man is not. Again, I did this across buildings in our district. I worked at Chicago Public Schools, as I mentioned, so that was 500 different schools. Now, if you've never been to Chicago, it's an incredibly diverse and segregated city. So my school that I had taught in for a decade was on the south side of the city, and again, 99% African American. Another school that I worked with when I got to the district admin level was 5 miles north on the same road, and had 3 black children in the entire building, and the mean income was in the 6 digits. Those students had an incredible reaction to this picture. The teachers that I was working with, we decided to have a discussion about the way the pictures that the kids most discussed and why, and we decided to have them have a conversation about it, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation. But you can see here, this is my students' reaction and thread around the discussion, and you can see that Trinity is talking about the young man from Kenya, that she felt really sad that he only had 1 toy and other kids had many, and she's talking about it with these other kids. I thought it was really interesting that Sincere wrote, it made him value what he had, and it made him really understand that he was lucky to have what he did have access to. So they're starting to have these really deep conversations, and again, these kids are 9 years old. We're not talking about middle or high schoolers here. So these were conversations that I was not seeing in my classroom previous to doing things like this. Then we started moving them from a closed chat that was in a learning management system to something like Today's Meet. Now, Today's Meet isn't around anymore. Miss you. But the nice thing about Today's Meet was it created a character limit. Now, sometimes my students in Google Classroom, Schoology, and Modo would write mini dissertations. And they didn't really understand that when you're having a virtual conversation like that, brevity can be good, less can be more. And so they would spend the entire 5 minutes of the song writing like a 10-paragraph response to how they were feeling about one picture. Today's Meet limited kids to that 140 character limit that at the time Twitter was limiting kids to. Now that Today's Meet isn't around anymore, I kind of bootstrapped it myself. So what you can do is give students a Google form, and you can create character limits within it, but also share the spreadsheet the form spits into as well with the students at the same time. How many of you have laptops or Chromebooks or iPads? Okay, great. So this works across all of those devices. I would give them the form. It would limit their first response to whatever you want. You can limit the character limit in the form settings. And then when it came into the spreadsheet, kids could comment on the cells and do their responses that way. So they would click a cell, click comments, and then respond in that thread. If anything I'm saying technically doesn't make sense, I'm happy to hang out afterwards and show you a tutorial of the logistics of where to click and how to do these things. But this session is really more about the pedagogy and conception of it. If you want to know the technical aspects, I can do that with you after. So I normally would ask what kind of back channels you guys use in your classroom, but we don't have a ton of time, so let's just shout them out instead of having a full discussion, so it's like totally bad pedagogy. It's really interesting. I'm doing this session around voice and discussions, and I'm not allowing any discussion, so I want to name that hypocrisy and apologize for it, but we only have until 7:50. So just shout out what back channels or discussion tools are you guys currently using. Questions in Google Classroom? Higher Google. Back channels.
Padlet now has a back channel feature as well. Padlet
Oh,
has
Padlet.
a back channel feature now in there as well.
Awesome. Padlet. Great. So these are all really great examples and exemplars. Now, how did I use this in my classroom as a teacher? Again, I taught math, so what was I having my students discuss? So after we got to a point when they were very intentional with their with what they were talking about, and also they learned how to back channel in real time by giving them exposure to some sort of input and let them discuss it, I started letting them do what I called sanctioned note passing, which they were really pumped about it because I called it that. And I said, I'm going to teach a lesson. We tried it, and we beta tested it one day. I said, I'm going to teach something, and while I'm doing it, I want you to back channel about what I'm teaching. Now, if anyone is tweeting right now, if anyone tweeted during Tom's keynote yesterday, or you're ever like watching, you know, The Voice and like Facebook and you're tweeting, you're back channeling, you're sharing with the world your reaction to a piece of input. And I wanted my students to do that, but about what I was teaching. So, you know, I might be talking about how to find the volume of a pyramid, and I would want the kids to be like, wait, this seems like it's like how she found the volume of a cube. Is it gonna, yeah, oh my God, you're supposed to live it, this is so cool. Like, that's how I pictured it would go. Like, rock on, volume is so amazing. And I did have one lovely math nerd who did respond like that consistently, bless his heart. But the rest of my students, what I found was they used the back channel to ask for clarification and support when I wasn't being clear. And all of a sudden they had access to all the other minds and co-teachers in the classroom who spoke fourth grade better than I did, and who could help them say, this is what she's talking about when I spoke too fast, which some of you may notice I kind of speak quickly. So it would be really interesting. I'd be teaching something and the kids would be back channeling, and then the kids who are more brave to raise their hands would raise their hand and be like, Miss McGarrah, I'd be like, yes, Brittany, can I help you? She's like, nobody understands what you're talking about. Can you stop and do that again? Now, all the kids who didn't understand what I'm talking about just would have sat there and suffered in silence, or just like zonked out, Bueller style, and like started drooling on their desk. But because they were feeling safer to put in the back channel, like, I do not understand what she's saying. Me neither. What word was that? Blah, blah, blah. Then finally, the brave kid in the class was able to raise her hand and halt the whole class for the benefit of everyone, and I was able to take it down a few notches and try it again. So things like that started happening more often. The kids began advocating for them more, and it really built a really strong and collegial classroom community. Some of the bitterness and rancor that I saw as fourth graders become teenagers in the course of the school year really faded away, and it's true. Like, they come in, they're adorable, and they're cute, and they hug you, and at the end they're like, oh my God, leave me alone. I'm like, I hate it. So that really takes us to the school community. Now, these like pods of like, you know, downright positivity were starting to sprout up across our building and across the buildings that were doing these things. And we were thinking, how can we make this more pervasive beyond the four walls of our classrooms? The school community is really interesting because the school community that I, again, had worked in for a long time was very unique and specific. We were in this brand new, beautiful building, but we were over 95% free and reduced lunch, as I told you, and a majority-minority student body. And we'd only been open at that time for a few years. And the thing about this was the students in this area, you can kind of see them in the background right now, all lived in the Chicago Housing Authority project called the Herald at East Homes. If any of you were ever Kanye West fans, we're not going to talk about politics, but he did have a song called Homecoming, which was about Chicago, and the music video was filmed in the Herald at East Homes, and my students were in it. And it was so cool at the time. I was like, oh my God, this is great. My kids were like, I know, we've always been famous. But there's something unique if you've never worked with students who live in a residential setting that way, is that you literally live on top of each other. And if you've lived in an apartment building, it's not like that. It's even more so, where you're very entrenched physically in each other's lives. So when they went home, these students across our building community were living on top of each other and in each other's business and communicating all the time. And all of a sudden they'd get to school and we would put them into these silos and they never got to talk to each other. So the only time they were interacting were about really negative things usually, about, to be honest, gang territories. And some of you may say, you taught 4th grade. There are gangs in 4th grade. We had the Gangster Disciples and the Young Bloods. The Young Bloods were the JV squad for the Gangster Disciples. And so the only time they were interacting cross-classroom were to talk about very unsavory things as a teacher. So we wanted to think how can we get these students cross-building, talking to each other about more positive topics. When you teach, does anyone teach with a high need population right now? I know it's New Hampshire and you don't have a Chicago exactly, but I know Manchester is also not the most peaceful place all the time as well, yes?
I used to teach in Marshmallows, so.
Yeah, okay, great. So you probably have experienced some of this. Now, it turns out that in a lot of buildings, the more classroom management issues and the more behavioral issues you may think, the more fascist the rules become. And so in our building, at least, we would march our students in lines down the hallway, arms folded, we called it level 0, all the way through 8th grade. So we'd have 13-year-olds walking in lines silently down halls. And as an adult, you're like, that's not great, but it's how Chicago Public Schools is to this day. And so the students would literally walk silently through the halls without talking. Now, I also want to put a caveat for those of you who are like, that's not how my building is. When I worked at that building on the north side of this school, even though the kids were working silently through the halls, they were still self-maintaining silos. They would only walk with their group of friends, talk to their group of friends, and very rarely interacted beyond that bubble or their clique. Now, in our hallways, as many schools do, you usually put up student work, yes? And you do that to celebrate and to allow other students to see their work and to help them say, I'm proud of what I did. Now, the juxtaposition to this is we were then silently marching our kids past the work without allowing them to see, comment, or absorb it. Again, when I worked at a school that didn't have fascist marching rules, the students still didn't really stop to smell the flowers, so to speak. So we began doing things like including QR codes across all of our building with our students' work. Even if it wasn't digital work, we'd include a QR code. And the idea of the QR codes, what it would be, has anyone ever gone to a museum and you get the $5.99 little speaker thing and you hold it to your ear and some dude tells you about the art? It was our version of that. So after a student created a piece of student work, they would then either record a video, an audio clip, anything that they wanted to do to explain why they created it, how they created the process, that even the metacognition, it was a math problem. I did this, then I did this, then I did this. And then they put it somewhere on the web and link it to a QR code. As students walked down the hallway, and I'm going to explain the crazy way we did it at my school and then the more open way we slowly grew to. But when we were still having kids march in lines, we would give one student in the line either a touch screen device, like an iPad or a defunct phone, something that could scan a QR code. And they would capture QR codes down the hall. The kids would point at the ones they want, and they collect them on the device, and all QR code apps, or most of them, have a history. And they leave it in the classroom, and then students were able to go on, see through the history, and take time to really read about the work, listen to it, hear about it. And they could also leave comments for the students and tag them in it and say hey Caitlin, really love that. Hey Mike, that was really rad. Hey, can you tell me more about this? In the more open setting, kids had their own devices, they just did it at will, and that's how eventually this building has grown to this day. But we started with a very you are the one with the iPad, you will collect it for all the kids. And even that was a huge liberal change from what we had done, which is you shall not be seen or heard. Now, as the students were collecting them, we realized that it was not only allowing them to interact with each other in school, but the conversations outside of school began to change qualitatively. Parents were telling us that all of a sudden in the halls of the buildings of the Harold Igby's homes, they were having conversations about schoolwork. And they were what are you doing to our kids? So 2 kids who would be physically at odds would be yo man, how'd you make that ringtone in music class? Because the teacher at that time was having the kids learn about halftime, and they were making halftime jingles as phone ringtones. The kids were downloading each other's phone ringtones and literally setting them on their phones. So you'd be walking down the hall of your building and hear your original song playing off the phone of your mortal enemy. Now there's that moment of like, ooh, I'm so bad, but then it's like, oh, this kind of feels good. And we saw the kids starting to find this commonality through their work, through their passions. Kids were finding out things that they never knew about each other. Even though they lived on top of each other, these two boys who literally got in a fight the year before that had 2 teeth left on the floor of our building and like blood, like punching each other so hard, found out they both had a pet chinchilla, which terrifies me because chinchillas scare me. But they were really pumped about it because like, who has a pet chinchilla? And they'd never seen because they'd never been invited to each other's homes. And by the end of the 8th grade, they were buddies and they were in 2 rival organized groups. So these things that we saw, it wasn't making world peace, it wasn't solving the problems of the community in one fell swoop, but it was creating connections that otherwise would never have happened. And that was really amazing for us as teachers to see. And so you can see we did it again on analog work, but it was also really great for students who created digital work. We used this website, qrcode.kua.com. It's a free website, and it's really nice because you can create links and videos as well as other QR code pointed landing spots. Which then takes us to Twitter. So the students now all of a sudden, we're talking with each other about schoolwork, we're building bridges across communities, and we're really starting to get to know each other a lot better. So the next question we began to ask is like, is it time to introduce social media? Now, I did this across our network at the same time, and our high schools it was pretty easy for them because most of their kids were already on Twitter. So they created a hashtag, and they began it by having a student moderate that hashtag and speak on it. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but for our younger students, the way it worked was every teacher used their district email address to create a new Twitter handle. And this was very important to us because some of the teachers were like, I already have Twitter. And I'm like, yeah, but your Twitter handle is like, you know, bootylicious123. Like cool for your personal life, but maybe not for your kids. So let's make a new Twitter handle. So all the teachers' Twitter handles were usually like their room number or like Mrs. Megara Math or something like that. And their students would submit tweets that they wanted tweeted out into their classroom handle through Today's Meet, Google Forms, their classroom discussion, Moodle, what have you. And the teacher would then tweet it out on behalf of the students through the classroom Twitter handle using only their initials. Now the reason why Twitter, Facebook, social media sites block students from signing up under the age of 13 is because of their personally identifiable information. They don't want to have kids at risk from being exposed to things on the internet that are not so nice, but also from not so nice people on the internet using their data for not so nice things. And this way, we're allowing students to share their thoughts without sharing any personally identifiable information. The teacher did always put either their initials or sometimes kids made up avatar names or fake social media names. Like one of my students was Math Girl 123, another girl was like I love boots because she loved boots. And they would put their like fake handle in parentheses next to it. It didn't technologically do anything, but what it allowed was at the end of the day, the teacher would let that rest and then get comments and curate them, and then create something called a storify. I'm usually familiar with that website. You can put in a hashtag and it aggregates all of the tweets under that hashtag into a nice printable or downloadable page and show the kids, and they can find their tweets that were tweeted by the teacher and see how people responded to them. So I just want to show you, this is our students across the grades from K through 8 talking about something we created called Twitter Tuesday. We started this by having a question of the school every Tuesday, and every class in the entire building would respond to that one question, just to get the kids used to cross-classroom Twitter collaboration.
Hi, I'm Princess, and I am in 6th grade. And on Tuesday, we get to tweet to the younger kids and tell them how we fought them together. And they get to tweet back to us and tell us how they fought them together.
Hi, Elijah. My name is Ndidi, and I go to NTM Room 111, 1st grade. Hi, I'm Asian. I'm in kindergarten. I am going to tell you about Twitter Tuesday. We talk to other classrooms in the school that has Twitter Tuesday, and like Twitter Tuesday because I get to see the memes on Twitter. At first, NTA 111. Our hashtag is NTA Learn. Twitter Tuesday rocks.
So at that time, those were the classrooms that were participating. That was the hashtag. You want to come up with a hashtag that it's all falling under. The thing that we saw that was really great about this was it really helped for the focused conversation. Now, when we did this in the high school, it was hard to get participation at first. The kids were like, Twitter's my thing. Actually, now they're not using Twitter as much anymore, so we're trying to do Instagram stories, quick side note. But at that point, in 2014, Twitter was the jam, and the kids were like, hey, you guys are old and lame, we're not doing your dumb Twitter Tuesday thing. So we would try and create Twitter Tuesday prompts that were nominated by students. We crowdsourced the high schoolers for what are topics that you want to discuss as a school community. And then the faculty would pick us full appropriate ones, sometimes in the Google Forms, and not so nice things came up. And then that would be the Twitter Tuesday prompts to at least start building that interest and participation. We also tried to find influencers in the high school, students who were positively influencing others and that people seemed to follow, and use positive peer pressure to get kids to join. So we found the kids who other kids listened to. They participated in Twitter Tuesday by creating a social media forum where they come every week, give feedback, talk about how we're using social media in the high school to help the community, and then they would kind of model it, and other kids would be like, oh, well, if so-and-so's doing it, it's gotta be cool, so I'll do it too. And they're like, yeah, haha, teachers are cool. So we would come up with the prompts, usually a quarter at a time. In the elementary schools, a lot of times, because they didn't have the student social media groups yet, they would do the entire year's prompts. But I highly recommend you have a group of kids help think about the prompts, because that, again, it's about their voices and their ideas. But one teacher took turns every week being the person who would tweet it out. Usually we made a little picture card, so because when you tweet and there's a picture, it always gets more responses. They would also be in charge of doing storify.com at the end of the day, so they would storify the hashtag and then share that with the entire faculty so that they could talk to their students about it. Our youngest learners did it during rug time in the morning, so our kindergartners and first graders, when they're doing calendar and weather routine, the teacher would also project some of the storify and read it to the kids and say, hey Jalen, your tweet got this response, etc. And then the older students could just go through, the over 13s could go through and see it themselves. For the kids who are at reading age, they usually just posted the storify in Google Classroom or Moodle or Canvas or what have you, and they could just scroll through it on their own. So again, storify.com. Now, what I really liked about this was when we did Twitter Tuesday, at first it was the kids talking to each other, and that was really great. It was really cool. Isaac here is the principal, Mrs. Leonard is a first grade teacher, Jada Jackson is a student, is a student's parents. Miss Lynch is another first grade teacher, so parents were talking, kids were talking, this whole community was really coming together, and that was really great. But there's some more learning that came through that I'm going to talk about next in the networked community. A couple quick things. I did this with my district that I went to after Chicago Public Schools, which, do you guys enumerate all your districts around here? We're like District 10, District 11, yeah, so we're District 62. Some states don't do it. When I say that, they're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, so I went to District 62, and we came up with the hashtags for each building, and then a district-wide hashtag. So we started creating both district-wide and building Twitter days. So some days the entire district was tweeting, which was possible because in 62 we only had 12 buildings. I don't think it would have been super productive in Chicago Public with 500 buildings, at least to start, because with kids, all that input would have been a lot. I think eventually they could have grown into it. And then we had tweets of the week. But we also had challenges to get teachers involved. Some of the teachers didn't want to do this. So we had a digital learning day challenge where if the teachers with the most tweets won a classroom set of Google Cardboard and a tablet to run Google expeditions in their classrooms. So as the head of technology, I was like, I can't afford one for every teacher, but I can bribe them to tweet with one set. And that really worked. And then we also created videos like this one to teach the teachers what Twitter was.
Twitter. What is it? Twitter. Twitter is a social network made up of 140 character messages called tweets. It's an easy way to connect with other educators.
All right, I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing. that video, and we have a lot of other resources to help some of our teachers who weren't quite comfy with it get comfy with it. You can go to bit.ly/62learns. We have that video, some other resources, some do's and don'ts of social media that we helped get some of our more technophobic colleagues on board with. Now, when you're creating your hashtag, I just want to take a quick public service announcement moment to really think carefully about it. So you can see we had hashtag 62learns, hashtag NTA-learns. Another one that NTA uses, NTA stands for National Teachers Academy, which is a really ridiculous name for a K-12 building, but that's what it's called. We had to think about it. And the reason being is, first of all, as you know, Twitter, well now like the character limit is different, but there's still a limit of characters that you can type in. So you want to think about that economy of characters, and even if you don't have one, if you're doing a Facebook post, it's still like nobody wants to read like a 10-page Facebook post. You see them on your wall and you're just like, oh my god, pass. So we want our students to think about how are we going to use those characters, but if their hashtag is 20 characters long, like we're sucking up valuable space for the kids to say what they think. So you want to use fewer characters, less is more. But then the other thing that we didn't really think about were unintentional words. I have a friend named James Sanders. Some of you might have known him. He created Breakout EDU. And when he was a classroom teacher, long before Breakout EDU, he was an English and history teacher. And he was really excited to create this new program where he was going to have kids tweet about writing. Makes sense, right? Tweeting is writing, writing is tweeting. Yay, let's tweet about it. And it's like, yeah, that's great. So he came up with this whole thing about, you know how they say like mightier than the sword, like a word is. So he wanted to talk about how writing is mightier than fighting and things like that. And he wanted to create a hashtag around it. So he came up with a hashtag the pen is mightier. And so his hashtag pen is mightier. Great, pen is mightier. Take out, for some of you are laughing and you can already see it, take out the space between pen and is, mightier. So then it blew up and he taught high school. So his kids loved this hashtag. And at first he's thinking like, I nailed it. Like, the world's best teacher. My kids are so engaged. Look at them using this hashtag. Weird things are coming on this hashtag. Wait a second. What is happening? Oh my God. I made a group of high school students tweet penis mightier. Didn't notice it. So be careful, look for unintentional words. The other thing you want to think about is check for activity in a hashtag. Hashtags are not proprietary. Anyone can tweet on any hashtag. And so there's no way to stop someone from eventually jumping on your hashtag party, but you also don't want to jump onto someone else's hashtag party. Another sad example of this is when my building, NTA, joined up with another building, Burley Elementary in Chicago. Burley and NTA, we decided to create a co-hashtag, so we're doing all these cross-building collaborative projects with our classrooms. And any of the cross-building collaborative learning would be tweeted under hashtag BurNTA, B-U-R-N-T-A. So we're like, economy of characters, this is great. And we're like, Burn's in there, it's okay. BurNTA, that's fine. Whoa, God, it was not fine. Because there were lots of young ladies who were tweeting under BurnTA about going to the beach and burning parts of their bodies that might start with a T and an A. And, our parents, who we had very excitedly and enthusiastically encouraged to follow BurnTA, were not as excited or enthusiastic about what happened thereafter. So they would see this lovely picture of, two grade 8 students talking about, their high school applications, and then a picture of a bunch of ladies on the beach with burnt body parts. Doesn't really jive. So we didn't check to see were other people already using this hashtag. So please check. Sometimes it can overpower it, but it's better not to, just to come up with something else. And that takes us to the networks community. So as you're thinking about using social media and you're getting getting out of your school community, now you're being exposed to people who aren't immediately school friendly. And the first level is the networks community. I told you about the Toy Story example with my students, and these are my kids talking to the other building about that. The reason my students weren't as surprised about the use of toy guns was because, again, my students came from a community where guns were pretty ubiquitous, and they see them on a daily basis. whereas the students from the other school had never seen a gun before. So they began to talk about this, and they actually built a cross-school gun safety program for children to think about, like, what is the right thing to do if you ever come across a weapon? How do we encourage our family members to be safer with them? How do we think about what we feel is right or wrong? Now, really interestingly, this expanded, and we did another Google Hangout with a group of kids from Maine. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the teacher named Kern Kelly from Central Maine. And he runs a group of kids called the Tech Sherpas. And they did the same thing, and we talked to them. And it was really interesting because what neither of these two classes talked about were hunting guns, because hunting's just not a thing in the city of Chicago. And all of a sudden, all of Kern's students were like, yeah, we all, like, most of his kids have shot a gun. There's a taxidermy class in his school. And so they began talking about using guns for, like, food and to, like, help their family. And that was a completely foreign concept to have this discussion. So this became something that allowed our kids to have these discussions beyond their communities and be exposed to different ideas, which was really powerful. I know we're running over time, so I'm just going to skip over to the final bit of this, which is the global community. Now, the network community is really great when we're getting our classes to connect, but then it's really neat when you can connect your students to students and figures that you don't have access to. Ray Nashar is a teacher out of Australia, and he's also a father of 2 kids. These are his kids. And they were reading a book about astronauts, and the kid said to him, "Daddy, I want to meet an astronaut." Now, normally when your kids say something to that, you're like, okay, or like, I can, or that's cute, or whatever. Ray said, yes, I am going to make it so you can meet an astronaut. So he tweeted some astronauts. He tweeted Nicole Stott, who works at NASA, and Commander Michael Lopez Alegria, and they responded, and they started tweeting with his children. He tweeted NASA itself. They tweeted back. They even mailed to Australia a little NASA patch for his kids from the United States. And his kids obviously were tickled, and they think his dad is like the biggest hero in the whole wide world because they ask it and it happens. I was like, you know, you're setting yourself up for disaster, right? Too, you know, like you're gonna be like, no, I want a pony unicorn. You're gonna like tweet and find one. But like this is one example of many. Another example was one of our teachers tweeted out to oh gosh, what's his name? He does the little critter books. What is it? Mercer Mayer. Tweeted out to Mercer Mayer, my kids love your books. Here are their drawings for a little critter. He tweeted back and did a Google Hangout with the entire kindergarten. So lots of examples of these people who they did not normally have access to, responding to, and having interaction with these students, not just in a broad form letter way, but actual one-on-one interaction. A final example is how many of you guys use the app Explain Everything? Any of you? It's a iOS and actually Android. Actually, it's on Chromebook too. But it's a screencasting app, and my students used it and hated it when it first came out. So one of my kids wrote an eviscerating blog post about why it was a terrible app and how they hated it, and they tagged the creator on Twitter, who responded to them. And he's a really nice guy and a teacher, Rashawn Richards. He responded to them and sat on a Google Hangout with my student, Caleb, for an hour while Caleb gave him point by point why he hated the UI of Explain Everything version 1. He added almost all of Caleb's bug fixes, re-released it, and sent a public thank you to Caleb. Caleb was 11. And now he can go around, and he does. If you talk to him, he'll be like, hi, my name's Caleb. I invented Explain Everything. I'm like, you invented it. So I know we've run out of time. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. I also have all of these ideas and more in my book, which I'll have after the keynotes up at the front that you can grab and take a peek at. Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope that you guys got some new ideas around social media in your classroom. And if I didn't hit on anything or you want to dig more, feel free to come up after the session. Thank you and see you guys.